Hello and welcome to Wild on 6TV, the Oxford Channel. I'm Sasha Norris. Now, have you noticed how in the last 2 weeks of April, everything turns from brown to glorious green? Well, this phenomenon is called greening, and this programme is all about celebrating that. A couple of weeks ago, before it happened, I went out with Caroline Jackson Holston, botanist, to talk about the poetry of spring. The sweet spring now is coming in beautiful sunshine, thorn buds and wild flowers blooming, daisy and celandine. Something so sweet there is about the spring. Silence is music, ere the birds will sing. Caroline, it's spring! Hooray! That was John Clare. What you're lecturer in English literature at Oxford Brookes University.
I am.
Why is spring so important to poets?
Well, spring's important to everybody, I think, and there are many, many reasons. It seems to have something to do with the way in which we each connect with the idea of time's arrow going straight and time's cycle, things coming again. And that means that when the spring comes, it promises that renewal.
There's something about the way spring is always beautiful and always the same, in a sense. I mean, it shifts slightly, it comes earlier or later, or there are more or less flowers or different types of butterflies, but somehow it's always as beautiful, isn't it? Whereas we get older and sort of fade away, or we're sad or happy, but somehow the spring cheers us all up, isn't it?
Yes, we aren't always the same, and of course it doesn't necessarily cheer us up, but usually it does. And Claire is somebody who's very much reminded of the past by spring flowers,
right.
Particularly.
Okay.
And that's a lovely volume actually of poems by Claire, all about flowers, that's edited by a colleague of mine, and you'll certainly find lots of poems in that where he uses flowers to get back to the time of his own youth, and I think that's a very common use for them. It's the spring of the year, and we go back to our own spring as well.
The idea of the innocent rambling around in the country looking for flowers and communing with nature.
Very much so, yes.
Shall we go and commune with some more flowers?
Yes, and we'll see what we can find to illustrate the way in which poets have thought about flowers, and particularly about tree flowers, which aren't necessarily thought of so often.
We'll leave this blackthorn, this white blossomed blackthorn, and go for. Thanks. What's that crawling along on the floor there? It's a caddisfly with what is it? A caddisfly with a wing that's...
It just hasn't properly opened.
And if you just tilt the camera up, you'll see Dr. Nick Brown, who is also joining us on today's programme. Nick is a plant ecologist from Oxford University's Plant Sciences Department, and he's going to tell us about the science of greening. Isn't he, Louis? Come on, let's go and have a look at some trees. Right, tell us about the sycamore.
Okay, well I was going to tell you, Sasha, about essentially how a tree like a sycamore knows when it's time to come into leaf at the end of winter. Now, when you wake up in the morning, what is it that gets you out of bed? Is it Louis?
Yeah, often it is Louis, yeah.
Yeah,
the dog, that is.
Right, it's usually my son that wakes me up, but I mean there are other people in my lab who get woken up by their alarm clock or by sunlight coming in through the window. And plants are exactly the same, that they all wake up in spring, but the mechanisms that actually wake them up are all different.
So if you're a plant, how do you wake up in spring?
One of the most important is temperature, obviously warmth. Yeah? And the more that the buds of a plant are bathed in sort of spring sunshine, the more they mature, ready to burst open and produce their leaves. But that's not the only mechanism. There are some much more complicated systems as well. A lot of plants actually have a sort of biological egg timer. Yeah, that will tick away from counting down from the time at which winter first started. Yeah? So they're essentially setting themselves off at a known time after the onset of winter,
so
when they
say...
think that they can get a head start before other plants are up and about.
So you were saying about bluebells, we haven't got any bluebells right here. You were saying that they say, it's cold now, it's really cold, it must be winter, I'm going to set my timer going now.
That's right. And once the timer's run out, off they go. And there are all the sort of the important parts of the flower are already developed from the previous autumn, so that when that timer rings, they can leap straight out of bed and be there catching the first of the spring sunshine and getting a head start above other plants.
So what about sycamore? Tell us about sycamore. You sort of went, there's a sycamore. First of all, it's not native. Second of all, it comes into leaf early.
Yeah, this is one of these ones that appears to be very sensitive to temperature. Sycamore is really keying in to the sort of first warmth of spring, and really as soon as its buds have soaked up some of that early spring sunshine, they're off. Now, one of the problems with that is because you can see it's got a very big and very thick leaf, and it casts some pretty dense shade. Yeah. So as our climate begins to warm up and sycamore comes out earlier and earlier, what we're finding is that a lot of our spring wild flowers are ending up growing in shade rather than in spring sunshine. Yeah.
What else have we got?
Well, the other mechanism is photoperiod, essentially the same way that we tell it's spring, because the mornings are getting lighter and the evenings are staying lighter longer.
Cow parsley. Yeah.
Cow parsley is one of those plants that's actually very sensitive to soil temperature. Yeah. So a warmer spring, like we've had this year, means that the cow parsley is up almost as quickly as the bluebells. Yeah, the bluebells used to have a head start because they didn't have to wait for spring warmth to get going. All they had to wait for is that alarm clock to go off. But cow parsley had to wait until spring warmed up enough before it started growing. Bluebells got a head start. Unfortunately, that doesn't appear to be so much of an advantage these days, because the warming is happening earlier and earlier in spring, and cow parsley is catching up with bluebells. They're both up and about at the same time.
Spring softens all the edges.
There are some nice lines in poets about that effect, and it's something that is called greening, not as a technical term, but it's a term that poets use, which I think is very nice because it makes it very active. Here we are, the thorn tree just began to bud and greening stained the sheltering hedge. So he's not just saying it's green, he's saying it's getting greener.
Yeah.
And that makes it seem really, really active.
Yeah.
So you can feel the process of spring happening.
But it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, when we have a tree outside our office window, and all winter it looks a certain way, and then suddenly you come in, perhaps after a weekend, and it's green. And then it gets, as you say, it does get greener and greener and lusher and lusher. It's fantastic. And suddenly the birds, which you could see every day, have disappeared inside this green mass.
Yes, but there are some interesting colour changes even before the leaves start to come out. Birch twigs particularly. Silver birches have wonderful purplish red twigs that get a much more intense colour at the end of winter.
Here, look. It's not showing perfectly, but you can see how that purple colour. And a bit earlier on in the season they're even more purple. Here, look, you can see it here. Beautiful patchwork of... There, you see that purpley. Of course, the silver of the silver birch trunk there.
Actually, do you know?
Yeah, no.
This is lilac.
Yeah.
This is one of the plants in Britain that we have the longest record of it coming into leaf and flower of any plant in the country.
We know when the lilac comes into bloom.
It's because gardeners have always recorded it. But all that is changing, and actually you can be involved with the change, because the Forestry Commission at the moment is running a great project looking at the time that oak trees are coming into leaf.
Yeah.
And if you go on the web
Yeah.
to the Forestry Commission's webpage,
Yeah.
you can look at your oak trees in your garden or in the bit of woodland just down the lane, and when you notice that the buds have burst and the leaves have first come out, get on the website and put the date in.
Right.
And what you see is this fantastic map of oak coming into leaf across the country.
everything's at it, isn't it, really, in spring? We've got some beetles that are at it down here. Oops.
Well, you could say that if you wanted.
It's a bit unfair, really, to pick them up when they're in the middle of... Well, I think it's quite apparent to the audience what they're in the middle of.
I think they're very determined.
The female's a lot bigger than the male, isn't she? Do we know what species they are?
I have a way of finding out, but it would definitely interrupt their love life.
Oops, I think we just did. We better leave them to it.
Yes.
Over here we've got some celandine, and it says in the same Clare poem that I was reading earlier, it says, "On gates the yellowhammer as bright as celandine sits."
Essentially, a bluebell, the bulb of the bluebell is a protective organ around the shoot, yeah? And in the late summer and early autumn, the bluebell is actually forming the shoots for the next year. So this was all put together last summer, early autumn, yeah? And it's kept there, stored inside the bulb underground. Yeah? Now, as soon as temperatures drop below about 10 degrees C or so, it sets the biological clock going in this, the sort of the alarm clock, yeah? And that'll tick away all winter until time runs out, and then off goes the alarm and up come the bluebells.
How do we know that, Nick? Do you know how we know that?
I don't know who's done the experimental work, no.
But somebody showed that if you took these bulbs and kept them warm
That's right.
all the time, they never would flower.
That's right, yeah.
Because they'd say, oh, there's been no winter,
Yeah,
I can't flower
it's
yet.
not yet spring.
It's not yet spring.
Yeah.
So really, the lesson there is that in order to have the spring, we need the winter.
Yeah, actually the chilling of bulbs and of buds and things like that is actually a very important mechanism for plants knowing what time of the year they're at. Yeah.
So really, I mean, it's a sort of, we can't have the up without the down.
No,
Is that
part
right?
of the variety of our climate. I
Is that a
guess.
lesson for life? The bluebell is teaching us something about life.
Yeah.
What else have we got? We better walk that way so we're not walking onto the William Max Muller's grave. Who said black about ash buds? What was it?
Tennyson. He compared a young girl's hair to ash buds. He said it was more black than ash buds in the front of March. He was also very short-sighted, so he did tend to concentrate on tiny things, the flower in the crowned wall and so on.
So he'd look very closely at things and notice them, but he wasn't so good at sort of broader views.
Well, he was quite good at broad views as well, especially seascapes, but he loved looking at tiny things. And I've actually brought with me a couple of Tennysonian lime buds, because in Maud, which is a poem he put a lot of himself into, the hero, when he's in love, talks about
Oh, look at those. Beautiful.
the emeralds that break from the ruby-budded lime.
They're beautiful, aren't they? They really are beautiful. And this is lime.
Yes.
Oh, it's true. That's what we're talking about. Bud burst. Look, this isn't actually in leaf, is it? What have we got here?
This is ash, yeah.
This is an ash.
It's a wind-pollinated plant, so it may well be that actually it's an advantage to it not to have leaves when it's establishing its, or when the flowers are being pollinated, because the leaves will get in the way of pollen dispersal. But here you go. Here's a bud. The big ash bud has just burst. You can see there, and those are the leaves coming out. Now, what's interesting about those is that they're still soft and juicy.
Yes, they are soft, aren't
Yeah.
they? They're so soft.
You can imagine those in a delicious salad.
Yeah.
And this is the time of year when there are lots of insects out feeding on those, the spring feeders. Essentially, this is, the time of year when there's bags of food around for them. In a few weeks' time, when these leaves are fully expanded, they'll be tough, they'll be full of sort of harsh, bitter tannins, yeah? They'll be extremely difficult to chew, and that's really no good for caterpillar food. So now is the time when the caterpillars really want to tuck in and put on weight in order to develop.
What's happening about global warming for the insects?
Well, you can imagine that a couple of weeks ago, there would have been no leaves here at all. The bud would still have been closed. Yeah. Now, if you were an insect that by chance hatched then, it would have been a pretty lean and hungry time, yeah, because there would be no food around. Leave it another couple of weeks, yeah, if you were an insect hatching 2 weeks late, you would find that already the leaves had hardened up and become harsh, unpleasant things to eat. And again, very little food available. So it's really important that there's actually a synchrony between the hatching of a lot of caterpillar eggs and the bursting of leaf buds. Yeah?
So you have to get it right.
Global warming is mixing up those signals again, and just like the sort of asynchrony between bluebells and the trees, so the insects and the tree leaves are out of phase. That has knock-on effects all the way down the food chain, because if the caterpillars have a tough time, then all the birds that eat the caterpillars have a tough time. It's going to be another of those factors that contribute to the decline of our poor, embattled woodland bird populations.
It's a green woodpecker.
As we were listening to this, I think that's one, isn't it?
Oh yes, yes.
That's a good cherry. They say that kissing's out of season when the gorse is out of flower, but as the gorse flowers in every month of the year, that means kissing's never out of season. So here's a little bit of spring Caroline. We can see the leaves coming through here on this rowan tree and on the hawthorns. But we still winter, there 3 days of the blackthorn, but winter's still very apparent, isn't it? It's still very, lots of the trees are still very empty of leaves. And it's so reassuring to see a bit of green coming, isn't it? I think
It's wonderfully reassuring, and they're right not to be too quick about it, because it was snowing this morning, of course.
it's true.
But certainly poets, especially in the 19th century, found it tremendously reassuring. Tennyson, for example, who famously had a period when he saw nature as being red in tooth and claw, actually got out of that mood of depression and despair partly through his joy in the spring, which he said heartens trust in that which made the world so fair.
Right.
So one interesting reason why spring was so important for 19th century poets is they got such delight out of it that they were able to use an emotional reaction to the beauty of the world to bolster up a religious faith that was perhaps being rather undermined intellectually by the other things that they were starting to find out about nature and the processes of evolution.
So this was a time when evolution was, people were starting to talk about it a lot, and people felt that the beauty of nature was evidence of the existence of God.
Yes, and of course still do. I mean, it's a very long-running argument.
I think either way, it's very reassuring, isn't it? Whether you're an atheist or a Christian or any other religious faith, I think the beauty of nature is buoys us all up.
Yes. How does it do it?
I don't know.
That's what we ask, and we must make sure that we don't mess it about so much that it can't do it any longer.
Absolutely.
We're going to show why it is that insects like to eat the fresh, new leaves of plants and don't want to tuck into the old, mature leaves full of tannins and tough fibres.
Using me as an experimental animal.
Sasha's going to be our insect.
Right.
This is a blind tasting. She's going to taste these and tell us which she prefers.
I'm going to do a blind taste. I have to keep my eyes shut.
We've got in this hand dandelion, and you can see I've got a fresh new dandelion leaf and a big old one, and in this hand we've got some hazel leaves, and Sasha's going to take a bite from one at a time and tell me which one she prefers. Okay, open wide. Okay, and next, sample B.
I think A was preferable to B.
Yeah, A was
that
the young leaf.
right answer?
That's the right answer. Okay, and again.
Right. That was the hazel leaf, was it?
That was hazel, and this is dandelion.
We don't recommend this at home. Well, dandelion's okay, isn't it?
and sample B.
Sorry.
You're not allowed to look, that's
I
cheating.
didn't see. Sample B was much better. Is B the young one?
Yeah, young dandelion leaves are actually nice in salad. When they get older, they get this horrible bitter, milky sap, which makes them rather unpleasant to eat.
They are, because I've often tried to eat them, but so it's the young ones that you have to eat, is it?
That's right, yeah.
You learn something new every day on Wild, you see. Loveliest of trees, the cherry now, is hung with bloom along the bough.
And stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide.
Now of my 80 years and 10, 20 will not come again.
And take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more.
And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs is little room.
About the woodlands I will go, to see the cherry hung with snow.
That's it from Wild this week. I'm Sasha Norris. Thank you very much for watching. If there's something going on in the countryside around you that we ought to be covering, then contact me at the Oxford Channel, 270 Woodstock Road, Oxford OX2 7NW. And until next time, remember, kissing is out of season when the gorse is out of flower, which is never.